behalf of the President and the First Lady, allow me to welcome you to the White House and thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. I want to acknowledge on behalf of the President the many distinguished guests here, Hershel Gober, who I will introduce in just a moment, and his wife Mary Lou Keener, and congratulations, Mr. Secretary, Commander Joseph Frank, National Commander of the American Legion, Colonel Herb Harmon, President of the Reserve Officers Association of the United States, Judge Laughlin Edward Waters, Senior Judge with the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, and most especially the members of the President's Cabinet who are present, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Secretary of Defense William Cohen, Ambassador to the United Nations Bill Richardson, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General John Shalikashvili, and other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff present, the many veterans organizations and the heads of those organizations present, and the representatives of a good many American ethnic organizations present. Tomorrow, in parades and picnics, on fairgrounds and in parks and backyards all around America, Americans will gather to celebrate our Independence Day and to give thanks for the freedoms and the democracy that we enjoy. This, of course, is always a very special time for our country, a time for family and community, a time to remember why we are so privileged to live in the greatest nation on the face of this earth. But this 4th of July weekend will be especially memorable for another reason as well, because as we gather to celebrate our liberties here at home, President Clinton will be leaving on an historic trip to Madrid to formally invite new members to join NATO and to increase the circle of freedom and hope in a new, united, and peaceful Europe. Without doubt, this meeting in Madrid will be viewed for generations to come as an achievement of tremendous importance. In a narrow sense, this meeting is the result of years of hard work, tenacious diplomacy, and steady leadership on the part of the NATO alliance. And as Americans, of course, we're particularly proud of the leadership that this President of the United States of America and his administration have shown. In a larger context, we can all say that this meeting in Madrid will be seen as the product of the remarkable patriotism and courage and sacrifice of our nation's fighting forces, both past and present, whether on active duty or reserve. The brave men and women who have these past decades put their lives on the line so that our nation would be secure and so that freedom for which we stand would prevail at home, in Europe, and around the world. Those of us who've worked with the President on this issue have been so proud that our nation's veterans and their leadership have worked so hard on behalf of an approach that's very much in the best interests of America and for the cause of freedom. And of course, it's no accident that these individuals and these organizations that have fought for so long in support of freedom and America's values would once again be in the front lines, so to speak, in making the case for what is a truly historic achievement for the cause of freedom. It's an honor to welcome all of you today, and it is a special privilege for me to now introduce a person who has been such an effective and compassionate champion of American veterans for so many years, the head of the Veterans Administration, Hershel Gober.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. President, members of military, members of the Cabinet, my fellow veterans, and ladies and gentlemen, I feel especially privileged to be here today because this is one of those special moments in history when the stage is set for events that will shape the future of the world for years to come. On the eve of America's Independence Day, as stated by the Vice President, our Commander-in-Chief is poised to leave for a historic international summit which has great implications for the security and independence of Central Europe. It is something the President alluded to on an earlier trip when he attended ceremonies in Normandy for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. Mr. President, on that occasion, veterans appreciated the heartfelt manner in which you expressed America's thanks for their service and sacrifice. It was an especially touching moment when you said, "They may walk with a little less spring in their step, and their ranks are growing thinner. But let us never forget, when they were young, these men saved the world." Then it seems you looked ahead to events that are just unfolding now. You said, "Today, freedom rings from Prague to Kiev, but we cannot stand still. Our mission is to expand freedom's reach forward." Freedom's reach is going forward with expansion of the NATO alliance, which has been our major safeguard for so many years. Mr. President, because of the open lines of communication and the candor that has existed between veterans organizations and this administration, you know exactly where veterans stand on this issue. You know that no one better understands the importance of this alliance and the value of expansion than our veterans. As I asked two of our nation's prominent veterans groups represented here today, the American Legion and the Reserve Officers Association, to come forward to briefly express their views, let me just add that I believe all of American veterans are proud of the achievements that laid the foundation for this alliance, proud of the significant role that you played, Mr. President, in making this expansion possible, and proud of America for her never-ending quest to expand freedom's reach. Mr. President, the nation's veterans wish you Godspeed. The American Legion, our nation's largest veterans organization, selected Joseph J. Frank of St. Louis as their national commander at their convention last year. While serving as a U.S. Army combat engineer in Vietnam, he was seriously wounded by a landmine. When he came home, he continued to serve his nation and his community, a fact attested to by 2 presidential certificates of achievement. Commander Frank has held a series of key positions in the American Legion, including chairing the Foreign Relations and National Economic Commissions. He currently serves on the executive board of the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities. National Commander and my friend, Joe Frank.
Thank you very much, Hershel. Mr. President, distinguished guests, Mr. Vice President, the American Legion believes that NATO enlargement represents a major step forward for the security of Europe. As the nation's largest veterans organization, we are forever mindful that this century has been marked by 3 major events: World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, all having their beginnings as a result of instability in Europe. Thousands of Americans fought in World War I and World War II. Many were killed, many more were wounded, and far too many are still unaccounted for, some 78,000 from World War II alone. Thousands of American veterans also served our nation during the Cold War, enduring many risks. NATO has been the most successful military alliance in all of history. The proof is this, that we did not fight a 3rd World War in Europe. Today, in the aftermath of the Cold War, NATO's mission has changed to meet new security threats and challenges. However, NATO is still responsible for maintaining peace and stability in Europe. That is why the American Legion wholeheartedly endorsed the U.S.-sponsored Partnership for Peace Initiative, or PFP, in 1994. PFP was the forerunner of NATO expansion, and this program has established strong links between NATO and its new democratic partners. Many of these nations were previously part of the Soviet bloc. Partnership for Peace provided encouragement and opportunities for their transition to democratic free markets nations. And today, many of these nations have been drawn closer together because of the PFP. The result has been a more stable and less divided Europe. Now it is time to take the next step, formal NATO enlargement, which will make a strong alliance, protect against another war in Europe, and lock in the gains which have been made in these new democratic, free market nations. Moreover, expanding NATO will also make for an undivided Europe. The American Legion is proud to support this major initiative which enhances European security as well as American security. We urge the Congress and the American people to engage in the debate on NATO enlargement and, in the end, to support the addition of these states to the NATO alliance. I thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues in Veterans Affairs, who also happens to be a fellow Vietnam veteran. The leader of the Reserve Officers Association, served as an infantry officer in Vietnam, and was awarded the Combat Action Ribbon and the Purple Heart. He continues to serve today as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, and he has been president of the Marine Corps Reserve Officers Association. Colonel Herb Harmon also is the managing partner of a Washington, D.C. law firm and a former president of the D.C. Bar Association. Colonel Harmon.
Thank you very much, Commander Frank. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Secretary Gober, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At our national convention held in Kansas City just 2 weeks ago, delegates from the states and territories, Europe, and Latin America, representing nearly 100,000 members, passed a resolution supporting NATO enlargement. This year marks our 75th anniversary. The first chapter of our organization was established by a young Reserve Army officer from Independence, Missouri. His name was Harry S. Truman. 28 years later, as president, he signed our congressional charter. President Truman understood that a secure Europe was a precursor to a safe America. He was, of course, at the heart of the negotiations that established NATO, the most successful integrated political, economic, and military alliance in the history of the world. The Reserve Officers Association belongs to the Inter-Allied Confederation of Reserve Officers, representing 800,000 officers from the NATO countries. In that capacity, we have been actively involved in many of the Partnership for Peace initiatives, including exchange training, military-to-military contacts, and international seminars. We will be meeting with NATO Reserve officers this month in Denmark, and we know that the eyes of our colleagues will be fixed on the actions of the United States. We will enter that meeting echoing our strong support of NATO enlargement. Thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce, as the next speaker, someone who has special feelings about the peace and security issues we've been talking about. On D-Day, 1945, a young Army captain came ashore on Utah Beach and participated in the 90th Division's drive from Normandy to Chambois. In the hard campaign that followed, this young officer was a company commander in the 359th Infantry, a unit that faced some of the toughest fighting on the front, alongside Polish troops, which reminds us that these are actually our old allies. Captain Lachlan Waters earned the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, both with clusters for multiple awards. Like many other young Americans who served in World War II, Captain Waters returned home to start a family and make a contribution to his community. He has succeeded admirably admirably in both goals. He and his wife have raised a son and 4 daughters, and that family, along with the extended family, is here today. He has become a distinguished jurist, serving today as a U.S. District Court senior judge. Highlights in a long and notable career include election to the California legislature, service as a U.S. attorney, and partnership in a major law firm. His continuing contributions to his nation include service as a consultant to the Department of State and a member of the White House Conference on Aging. The judge's memberships in fraternal organizations and professional societies are many, prominently including the American Legion. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Lachlan Edward Waters.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, those were indeed fulsome words of praise from Colonel Harmon, and I do deeply appreciate them, as well as I deeply appreciate the warm and enthusiastic applause that has been given to me. I should tell you, however, that not all of the evaluations that people have made of me have been sufficiently warm or sufficiently laudatory. Indeed, in Normandy, after the fighting in Chambois, the Nazis had released a number of horses from a French stud farm. And as my company went back for replacements, I secured a number of those horses and mounted the company on them because the men mostly were from Texas and Oklahoma. I rode a big red chestnut, which had a big shrapnel wound in its right rear hip. And I rode it up to the aid station where our regimental surgeon, Murray Franklin, was. Said, "Murray, let's take care of this horse." "Waters, get the blank out of here. I'm not a horse doctor." Well, the conversation went on in that vein for a while. Finally, he yielded. And that was the end of the story. I rode away, and the horse, I suppose, survived. Many years later, at a division reunion, Murray Franklin told that story essentially as I've related to you today. But as you know, in the Army, anytime you do something, you make a note of it. And so in his story, he said that his medical orderly asked the question, "What do I put down? Here's a treatment. We've got to make a notation of it." And so, as Franklin says, the official records of the United States Army show treatment, 1 horse's ass, Captain Waters. I'm going to have that expunged from the records. After the invasion in Normandy, the American troops pushed back the Nazis, took the town of Avranches, thus cutting off the Cherbourg Peninsula. After Avranches, the Americans turned north, which the British were, when the British were supposed to be advancing from Caen, although they did not get away from Caen on schedule. As a result, however, with the British coming down from the north and the Americans coming up from the south, a very large pincer movement developed. And this was an opportunity as viewed by the generals, both on the Allied side as well as on the Nazi side, to effect a master stroke, if indeed it could be done. And so the village of Falaise was set as a point for closure of that pincer movement. Falaise failed. The next point was the village of Trun. Trun failed. And the final point was the village of Chambois. At that point, my troops were stationed in Le Bourg Saint Leonard, where he had had some substantial action. and I received orders to attack Chambord, clear the town, and occupy it. As we moved up the hill, there was all kinds of firing taking place. The stuff that was flying through the air was just monumental. And I became concerned that if I went up in one direction and turned to the left, very well my rear or my right flank might be left unprotected. To avoid that, I spotted my troops behind a hedge in an apple orchard. I moved forward alone, following a line of trees, and then lay in the bushes adjacent to a road that led into Chambord. While I'm lying there, out comes an individual dressed in what appeared to me to be a British uniform. And he stood there, arms akimbo, looking around, again with all of this stuff flying through the air. And I was trying to signal him to come down, but finally, feeling that the honor of the American soldier was at stake if I continued to lie in the bushes, I got up and walked out there, with great reluctance, I must add. It turned out that this was Major W. Zgorzelski of the 10th Polish Dragoons. His English was much superior to my Polish, and so we had the opportunity to communicate with each other. We wrote notes identifying ourselves and our units. We coordinated our plans, and then we saluted each other, saluted our countries, and saluted the generals of our respective units. I look back on it now, I think standing there with all that stuff flying through the air, exchanging salutes. Well, silly things do take place in war, and that was one of them. We then continued on our way. But it was at this point that I had the first opportunity to meet Polish troops. And I worked with them for the next 4 or 5 days and found them to be fierce fighters, devoted to freedom, and greatly beloved of their country. They were splendid men in every way, and we had a magnificent experience with them. In the event that I were ever be called to war again, I would deeply appreciate the opportunity to fight alongside the Polish troops, because as Major Zgorzelski told me at that time, he said, this is the first time that Polish and American troops have met on the field of battle. Well, he had a better sense of history than I did, but in the event that ever again we find ourselves on the field of battle, Polish troops, people that are dedicated to the same principles that we have, are the ones that we should have standing beside us. Mr. President, this is the second time I've had an opportunity to share a platform with you. I, too, was present at the 50th anniversary commemorating the landing of the troops on D-Day at Utah Beach. And at that time, you spoke most eloquently about your hopes for the future and your aspirations that would guide and protect our country and the free world. At that time, you told us, as was quoted by the Secretary, that the troops of that day had paid their dues to their countries. Now you're about to embark on another trip, hoping to advance the cause of those hopes and aspirations that you so eloquently voiced. And I trust that you will have great success in that very difficult task. Keep in mind the old blessing, Mr. President, stay well, travel safely. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to present to you, with great dignity, great honor, and great affection, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. I know a good doctor. United States Navy. Mr. Vice President, Commander Frank, Colonel Harmon, Secretary Albright, Secretary Cohen, Ambassador Richardson, Mr. Berger, General Shalikashvili, and General Ralston, members of the Joint Chiefs, to the distinguished veterans and community leaders here, and especially to Judge Waters. You know, when he told that horse story, I nearly fell out of my chair. But you didn't know what I was thinking. I was thinking there have been several days here in the last 4.5 years when I would be grateful just to have been called what that doctor called him. Before I begin, I would like to state what I hope is obvious now, but I've never said it formally, and that is that I intend to nominate Deputy Secretary Gober to be the next Secretary of Veterans Affairs. We have been friends for many years. He did a superb job as the State Director of Veterans Affairs in our home state. He was a good partner and support to Jesse Brown, who fulfilled his promise to me to be a Secretary for as well as a Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And I believe that Hershel will serve in that great tradition, and I thank him for agreeing to do so. Tomorrow, as the Vice President said, we will commemorate Independence Day and the Declaration of Independence, which I recommend everyone read every Independence Day. The words still ring out of our abiding belief in the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we have a lot to celebrate on this July 4th. We are at peace. We are more prosperous than we have been in a generation. Our liberty more secure than ever. And for the first time throughout the world, for the first time in our time, there are more people living under governments of their own choosing than are living under dictatorships. That is an astonishing thing, that the dream of our founding fathers, articulated so powerfully 221 years ago tomorrow, has now come within the reach of more than half the people on the globe. Next week, we will take an historic step to secure that freedom for more people than ever before at home and abroad, when we invite new democracies from Central Europe to join our alliance at the NATO Summit in Madrid. I thank those who have spoken before me for their support. Together with our efforts to build NATO's ties to Russia and to Ukraine, and through the Partnership for Peace with so many of Europe's democracies, we're working to create a continent of Europe that is undivided, democratic, and at peace for the first time since nation-states appeared on that continent. Our nation has labored and sacrificed for this goal for more than 5 decades now. And now it is within reach. So in Europe next week, we'll have the chance to strengthen the values we all hold dear: freedom, democracy, security. Our work in Madrid will be a capstone of our nation's leadership throughout the 20th century and a cornerstone for a new age of possibility in the 21st century. I saw in one of the papers today a poll that said that only 6% of the American people felt that they followed events in NATO closely and thought they knew a lot about it. In a way, that is a stunning tribute to the success of NATO. For no NATO member has ever been attacked. If it had not been so, a lot more people would know about NATO. Now the time has come for us to make sure more Americans understand the significance of NATO to our security, understand the role it can play in the future, and understand why it is profoundly in the interest of the American people to go forward with this expansion. And all the people on this stage today and all of you in this room today have helped to make a significant contribution to that work. But I hope when you leave here, you will continue to speak about it to your friends and neighbors, to the members of your organizations, to the people with whom you come in contact. There are 4 reasons why NATO enlargement is consistent with our values and supports our interests. First, it will make our alliance stronger and better able to address the challenges to Europe's security. As has already been said, if we haven't learned a single solitary other lesson from the 20th century, surely we have learned that our future and Europe's are inevitably intertwined. A NATO that embraces Europe's new democracies will be more capable of carrying out its missions, defending the territory of its members, addressing conflicts that threaten our common peace. The Czechs and Poles served beside American soldiers in the Gulf War. Already the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, Romania, the Baltic states, and many other Central European countries that seek to join NATO are contributing troops to our NATO peacekeeping mission in Bosnia. Indeed, we could not have deployed our troops to Bosnia as smoothly and swiftly as we did without the critical help of Hungary and our staging ground at Tazar, which I had the privilege to visit shortly after it was established. By bringing new and capable democracies into NATO and deepening our cooperation with others who are not members at this time but are part of our partnership for peace, we build a stronger alliance for all future challenges to transatlantic security. Second, enlarging NATO will plainly help to secure the gains of democracy in Europe. NATO can do for Europe's East what it did for Europe's West after World War II, provide the kind of climate necessary for freedom and prosperity to survive and to grow and flourish. Third, enlarging NATO clearly will encourage prospective members to resolve their differences peacefully, and that will reduce the chances of further conflicts in Europe. Already, the very prospect of NATO membership has helped to convince countries in Central Europe to improve ties with their neighbors, to settle border and ethnic disputes, any one of which could have led to a conflict in a different time and under different circumstances. Finally, enlarging NATO will erase the artificial line in Europe drawn by Stalin at the end of World War II. And NATO will now help Europe to come together in security, not be kept apart in instability. NATO's doors will remain open to all those willing to shoulder the responsibilities of membership so that we do not replace an old division in Europe with a new one. And this is also critically important. The decision the NATO allies will make in Madrid must not be a one-time decision. Today, let me again say I thank the American Legion for its support. As the largest American veterans organization, many of your members fought to liberate Europe or to defend freedom there during the Cold War. And you know that this makes it less likely that future generations will be called to fight and die in Europe. I thank the Reserve Officers Association. Your endorsement speaks clearly to the American people because it is you who could be called out of your civilian lives to make good on our commitments. And you have recognized that enlargement will make us safer and stronger. There are those who say the Central European nations who will be invited to join NATO are not ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, but with all respect, they are wrong. The nations we are considering for membership share our values and our aspirations. They have shown that time and again. They also have the capacity to do what is required of NATO members. As you have heard today, in 1944, in the weeks after D-Day, American and Allied troops in Normandy sought to encircle 20 of Hitler's finest divisions, and some of the fiercest fighting of the war resulted. Our forces raced to seal the final gap between them and to prevent the enemy from escaping into the French countryside. 2 units got the job done. One, an American infantry division, The other, a Polish armored division, survivors of the invasion of their land who joined forces with the Allies. That gap was closed when the Poles finally linked up with the U.S. 90th Infantry at Chambois. The first American they encountered was the man who introduced me today, Captain Laughlin Waters. Now, once the pocket was shut, there was another furious battle as the panzers tried to break out. The Polish 1st Armored Division held a critical hilltop against a wave of counterattacks. When the Poles ran out of anti-tank rounds, they moved forward and repelled the enemy with only their rifles and their courage. After the Battle of Falaise Gap, 325 Polish soldiers were buried near where they fell. By these graves in the heart of Western Europe, Allied soldiers raised a simple sign of tribute which said in English, "A Polish battlefield." Judge Waters, your presence here today, 53 years later, reminds us of the character of those we are about to add to NATO, of the values and interests I talked about before. They remind us of our own freedom, democracy, and security. They too have fought and died for freedom and democracy, for ours as well as their own. They have fought and died for the freedom and democracy we celebrate tomorrow. Our ties, therefore, have been forged in blood. And just as they were strong allies in World War II, they will be again. So, Judge Waters, just as you and your men closed the Falaise Gap at Chambois, we must now close another gap, the gap of hope that has divided Europe since the end of World War II. We must give Europe a chance to live free and undivided for the first time ever. That is what we will do next week, and in the months and years ahead as we continue to work with Europe's democracies, strengthen NATO, and adapt it to the missions of the 21st century. Your presence here today has made our success much more likely, and therefore you will have something else to celebrate tomorrow on our Independence Day. Thank you, and God bless you.